Yay. Okay, now we are recording. Yeah, so the way that we're gonna kind of handle this today, where we're gonna roll is Linda and I are gonna take you behind the scenes. And if you guys have questions about the process, whether it's break related questions, book related questions, like we want this to be fun. And it's kind of fun for us to relive this and kind of celebrate the journey and see the pieces that were hidden maybe from our perspective while we were doing it. So we're gonna do that. And then Linda's going to share a little something extra that I think is really interesting because there are some ways that we found were very similar and some ways we're different in what we do. And so she's going to highlight one of the ways I think she's real. One of the things she does, I think, is really special. And then kind of, like I said, questions as you have them, you can either drop them in the chat as we're going and we'll try to watch them. But if you also want to just like raise your hand, it's just a conversation. But I think this is going to be really fun. And Lyndall and I got really excited talking about it. So I'm just happy everybody's here to have a conversation with us. Sound good for everyone? Yeah, awesome. Okay. Well, Lyndall, in case anybody, watching this now or watching the recording doesn't know you, could you just tell us a tiny bit about who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So my name is Lyndall. I am originally Australian, born and bred, but I live in Amsterdam now. And if you can believe it, I have taken 11 what I call sabbaticals and or career breaks, from really, short little breaks through to longer breaks. And I am also a sabbatical coach, but I guess the reason that I'm here today is because I was fortunate enough to be the technical editor for Katrina's amazing book. We're going to get into it, but I was just blown away by it. And I think that you guys probably will be too. That sort of covers what I do, right? Similar?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that was good. And to everybody that just joined, so sorry. I couldn't see that there were still people in the waiting room. And I meant to let you in and I apologize for that. Yeah, so Lyndall just introduced herself. She, as she said, technical editor for the book. And we're gonna dive in today, but make it a celebration and a really fun behind the scenes. Like I was saying before, Lyndall and I have a lot of really fun stuff to talk about. And there's some things Lyndall went through that I wasn't aware of, or I didn't know her experience and vice versa. So I'm excited to share that. So hi everybody. You know me because I wrote this book, which is why we're here today. And it was a labor of love, but I'm so excited to be at the finish line. I have been doing this now for, oh my gosh, 6.5 years. I've coached dozens of people through breaks, and it just feels really good to have put everything I know and then some things I didn't even know that I knew into a book and to let it live on. And so this to me feels like the biggest celebration to be here with you guys and to talk about it and just kind of like reflect on it, both the hard parts and the fun parts. So with that, Lyndall, can we well actually let me set the context for how the For Dummies brand does the technical editing, which is what Lyndall did, and the authoring, the writing, which is what I did. So I was given sort of just the topic, and I got to create a table of contents from that based on what I thought people would need to know to go from A to Z. If they couldn't have me as their coach, what would I want them to know mindset wise, tool wise, application wise? And so I went about writing and I wrote one chapter at a time. I had mini deadlines of 25% increments for the entire book. And so I would turn those in batches. I had due dates for that 25%. And once I turned it in, it would then go to Lyndall. And so Lyndall brought a really, a really unique perspective, but also she was very familiar with the world of breaks. So she was the other expert in the room, making sure things were accurate, adding a different perspective, and really expanding, my book, which we'll talk about more, for any place that I was overlooking or something that didn't seem clear, or just even if it was different than what she did it, I got to think through and feel more strongly about why I did it. And, did I want to expand it or rethink it? So it just made the book even better. So Linda would give feedback, and then it would go circulate to my developmental editor, who would review it, just more overarching. How is it flowing? Is it making sense? Would it make sense to the reader? And the copy editor would be in there as well, looking just for grammar. And then they were saving it all for me to the very end. And when I finished, they gave it all back to me sort of in drips over a 4-week period. and I had to revise it and go through Lyndall's feedback, the copy editor's feedback, and the developmental editor's feedback, kind of all at once to revise each chapter. And that was it for me. Like once I made those revisions, I sent it over, and it got like a final review from the developmental editor to make sure it all made sense and that there weren't big grammar things going on. And that was it. So Lyndall and I never actually really talked much during this period, right, Lyndall? Like we didn't really
So
communicate
weird.
at all. Like just yeah. But we'll talk about like the one or two times that we did, which was really really interesting experience. But Lyndall, can you tell us like from your perspective, like how was just the structure of the process, and how long did it take you? Like, do you know how many hours you spent, or kind of what kind of investment of time it was for you to be doing the technical editing?
Yeah. Yeah. So, because, yeah, so the strange thing for me was that I was getting it in out of order, right? So
Oh
I was not
yeah.
getting it in the right order. So that was weird to sort of start editing a book in the middle and then have to kind of like piece it together, which is always a bit strange. It from a time perspective, it was different for the different chapters. But basically, I would allow about 2 hours per chapter, because I'd sort of read through it and then like, understand, what you were trying to say. And then I'd sort of I'd have to let it marinate. So I'd read it, let it marinate. And then I'd sort of come back and go, oh, I think you could add here, or this isn't clear, or I know that other people think about it in different ways, or have you thought of this, or whatever it was, right? So yeah, and
Yeah.
so I basically would allow myself 2 hours, but sometimes like chapter 4 and 5, which were really heavy on the kind of planning stuff, and the longer chapters, they certainly took me longer. And then the chapters at the end of the book, I remember being relieved that they were easier for me because I was really busy at the time, and I was like, oh my God, I don't have time to do this. But then because the chapters at the end of the book were really like stories about other people's sabbaticals and all that kind of stuff. And so it was like, well, that's somebody's story. I'm not going to edit that. There's nothing for me to say there. So it was really quite a relief that they were a bit easier.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Linda. So I didn't even think about that from your perspective. So basically, once I had the table of contents, we had 15 regular chapters and two sort of top 10 list chapters, which were much shorter. And they were basically like, you can write whatever you want in whatever order you want. We just need you to hit that 25% deadline, meaning like, 25% of the chapters are done, regardless of the length and the order. And so I tried to go from beginning to end, because for me too, it was hard to think about referencing things that I haven't written yet that I know I'm going to write, but they might change in the future. So if I'm writing chapter 10, but I haven't written chapter 7, but I know I'm going to talk about this, it's like weird to reference something that only exists in your head. But that said, it was exhausting. So for me, it was 500 writing hours. So it was a lot, and that's not counting hundreds of hours. Yeah, like hundreds of hours spent like staring off into space, sitting at my computer, and then just deciding to do email instead, or picking up my phone to be like, oh, I wonder if something important is on my Gmail, and then just basically doing anything other than writing. So it was just 500 hours of actual time where I was like writing and thinking, and maybe writing by hand before I would like try to type it out. But there were times where I just jumped ahead to short chapters because I had to hit that deadline. And one chapter might be 30 pages. And I know when I look at the outline, it's going to be a big chapter. And then other chapters, it's like, oh, I know how to say this, and I can say this in like fewer words. So let me skip ahead. So Lyndall, yeah, I'm sure it was tough to not knowing where I was going, even with other chapters that haven't been written. I can imagine that was tough.
There's a question from Roger. How was I selected to be the technical editor? I
Oh,
can
yeah.
share. I think there were 3 people that they were considering, and then I think we had a chat, and then it was basically just based on experience, I think, wasn't it? I'm not sure.
Yeah. So they basically, the way that the technical editing goes, if it's a topic that is foreign to them or something that they don't have any adjacent books, they'll ask you. They'll say, we can find someone who's sort of in the industry-ish, but we would really love if you know of people to recommend. So I gave them a couple names, and I'm like, I don't know enough about what is going to be entailed as far as like skill level, as like editing versus like just tactical knowledge on top of time, right? Time investment. Is it a lot of time all at once? Is it a little bit of time dripped over? So I was like, here are these, three amazing people. Maybe you guys reach out to them and find out who's available and who you think would be a good fit. And so the Dummies team handled contacting the people and reaching out to find out who could do it. But the first step was me putting names together for them because they didn't know any experts in this space. And Lyndall, your process there was some back and forth, right? Like there was some negotiating
Well,
and stuff because
I had to be really clear with them. I was like, okay, let me be super clear that I don't have to do like grammatical editing, because if you want me to edit grammar, then I am not your gal. But they were like, no, that's the copy editor person. Like, you're really about where are the gaps? Does this make sense? Can you add anything? That kind of thing. And I was like, yeah, I can do that.
yeah.
I don't know. There was a little bit of what's that? Imposter syndrome. Like, I mean, I was like, do I know enough to be a technical editor? I don't know. And then I think still, even going in, even with the first couple of chapters, I was like, I'm not sure if do I know enough, typical imposter syndrome. And then as soon as I got into the first few chapters, it was so nice because I was like, I do know stuff. Oh, I do have stuff to add. Oh, I do have an opinion about this. Oh, I do have experience in this. It's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I had imposter syndrome as well, like writing a whole book when I've never been an author. So I definitely can get that. And to answer your question, Roger, yes, that is the standard, the SOP for them. They do always have those three, and they're always three different people to make sure like those various things are getting hit, because they do it so fast, right? From the day I got an email that said, would you consider writing this book, to the day my book was out in the world, like released on Amazon and in stores, was 364 days. It was 1 day short of 1 year. So that's really fast, right? To put out a book that, sort of with that much content to it. So Lyndall, I think following on, this thread, like I'm interested to know what was like the hardest part about being the technical editor for this book. I know what my experience, I'm going to share what mine is, but I'm curious, like, of all the things you've had to do and just the way that it kind of played out, what was the hardest part?
Yeah, so I mentioned like editing when I was receiving it out of order. Like that was just kind of hard, because I had to always put comments in sort of saying, well, you're talking about this thing, and I'm assuming that you will have like introduced that concept in an earlier chapter. Yeah. So if you've introduced that, great. And then I'll just kind of provide comments based on that. I received it more or less in order, but it wasn't always, perfectly. But I think the harder thing was realizing that as an editor, your job is only to provide comments of things that need to change, or things that, that you would phrase differently, or things that you don't think work well, or whatever. And so it can come across as really negative, right? And so because it wasn't, you just take up too much room if you keep on saying, this is awesome, this is great, oh my God, this is amazing, you're so good. Like that, it's like, no, I can't just keep on saying those things, right? And so halfway through the process, I felt like I really need to send Katrina an email and just tell her, like, okay, you're going to get my feedback, and it's all feedback, but you should know that overall, I think it's amazing. The whole thing is incredible. Like, you're doing such a good job, but you're only ever going to get the bits that I think should change, right? So don't take them out of context. I think the whole thing is great, and then there's just little tweaking. So that was, I think, the hardest thing.
Yeah. And so that relates to, I had a couple, like, I mean, I spent a lot of time with this book, but I couldn't like narrow it down to one. And that actually relates to one of my hardest things. So, when I started the process, I wrote a sample chapter, and writing that sample chapter is basically where you pick any chapter in the book except the first chapter, and they ask you to write it as if you're legit writing it, but you get assigned a Dummies coach. So that writing coach is there to make sure you're following the conventions. Are you putting icons on every page, at least one, but not more than 5? Are you mixing it up with bullet points or numbered lists or things that break up the text so it's easier to read? Are you writing it in an encouraging tone or a humorous tone so that people want to read it? Are you writing it at the right grade level, right? So just making sure that it fits in the style and within the conventions of a Dummies book. And it was so hard, you guys. I picked a chapter that I thought was going to be so easy. I think it ended up being chapter 10 or chapter 12, but it was about how to use your time wisely. And I was like, that's really easy. And as I started to write it, it became one of the hardest chapters because I was writing about a lot of mindset things and trying not to, sound too philosophical or too out there, but also make it applicable and interesting. And it was just so hard. And I remember a huge wave of imposter syndrome. There were multiple times when I was writing that chapter where I wanted to quit and just like say, I don't want to write this book, because I thought to myself, if this is one chapter and I have to do this 15 more times, I won't make it. And I actually freaked out and I wrote my Dummies coach an email and I was like, does anybody ever get a book deal and start writing and then have to quit? And if so, what are the ramifications of that? And she freaked out because she doesn't know me and she doesn't know what I'm capable of, or that I would, that I would finish it if I said I would. And she was like, if you think you can't finish this, you need to talk to your editor ASAP. That's a really big deal. It has happened, but it's like a lot of drama. And I was like, okay. And so my editor was talking me off the ledge. She was like, you've got this. It's amazing. I know you can do this. Like, I've seen your writing, like it's going to be fine. But I had a huge wave of imposter syndrome and I didn't know, could I really do this? And so after I write this sample chapter, I move on to finishing that first 25% batch. And what happened is, as I was writing that, my developmental editor, who's the project manager, sends me back one chapter that Lyndall, she, and the copy editor have all revised so that I get a taste of what's coming at the end. And if there are any big systematic or, like really sort of overarching problems, that I know about them and I'm addressing them in all the future chapters I'm writing, instead of letting me make the same mistake over and over again. But to send me that chapter back when I've just finished the sample chapter, I've just started writing like the next chapter, and I'm feeling really good about the fact that I'm writing it all. And to see all of this feedback, I just cried. I cried so hard and I was like, they can write this book themselves. I'm out. This is ridiculous. Like, I was like, I can't do it. I can't have people critiquing something that I can barely, find the like the energy to do myself. And it was really hard. And so I remember thinking, like, at this point, right? So this is funny, Lyndall. I don't know if if I ever told you this, but it was like, I remember thinking, like, why didn't they just have Lyndall write this book? She clearly knows so much more than me because Lyndall's adding to it. So Lyndall didn't have to like write all the things,
No.
right? But you're adding to it. And so it's like, I assume that she knows everything I've said. And then she knows this other stuff or has this other, and I'm like, they should have just had Lyndall write this book while I'm writing this book. And it was really hard for me. And Lyndall, to your credit, you sent me a message. It was like maybe a couple weeks after that. And you said, I was thinking, if it was me, like I put myself in your shoes, and if I was just seeing like everything that could be better or everything, but nothing like good or positive, that would be really hard. So I want you to know, I think your book is really good. And that meant a lot to me. And I remember I said, that's great, Lyndall. And if you could just like tell me like one thing you like in each chapter, that would make me feel a lot better. And you did. Every time when I got to the review, every time I would read a chapter, you'd be like, this is brilliant. And I was like, there it is. There it is. There's my nugget. But I needed that to keep going because it was really, really hard. So that was another really hard part for me, was doing that. And I would say the other really hard part is there was one chapter, this only happened one time, but there was one chapter I thought would be so easy to write. It's about travel. I know travel. I had an outline. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I could talk about this for years. But when I went to write chapter, I think it was chapter 9. I think it's chapter 9. But when I went to write this chapter, I got so stuck. Days went by and I would write it and delete it and I would try. And it was just like, I couldn't find the right order and I couldn't, like, the titles and the headlines weren't matching what I wanted to say. And it was so hard. And I remember freaking out and being like, oh my gosh, because I was only like halfway through, freaking out and being like, am I stuck forever? So I actually had to put that chapter on hold and move on to other chapters for the next batch and come back to it. And I was really nervous. I was not going to know how to write that chapter. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a travel blogger. And I said, I need to talk to you about travel and record it so that I can transcribe, what I want to say and figure out if that can get, like, if I can get the words on the page, I can make it better. And she was so kind. And so I basically gave her the outline of what I wanted to say. And I was like, ask me some questions and I'm going to talk you through it. And then she would ask questions as I was talking, like, well, what about this? Or how would you explain it to someone like this? Or what if they're afraid of traveling solo? Right. And so I just talked to her. I recorded it. It was an hour. I transcribed it. And I still had a lot of work to do, but it got me past the stuck point, and I was so grateful for that. I didn't do a lot of transcription just because I talk so differently than I write, and in the dummies, it has to be so condensed and so thoughtful and so to the point. It just didn't work that way. It wasn't like a memoir or something where I'm writing a lot of prose. But it was like I was really nervous. That was another really hard part for me. That was kind of like when I imagine when you're running, I'm not a runner, but you hit that, that length of in miles where you just don't know, like your body does weird things and you just don't know, can I run any further than this? And it was just that point where I was like, is this where I get stuck? And what I learned is you just keep going, you find ways around it, but I had never done this before, so I didn't know that. And that was really hard, but those were probably the highlights of my hard stuff.
The one thing that I learned from just being the technical editor was like, whoa, I am not ready to write a book, because I got all of your stuff and then I was like, oh my gosh, I could never do this. This is so detailed. This is so well thought out. This is so like, it was just like comprehensive. And I was like, my hat goes off to her.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lyndall. Roger, my word count ended up being 97,000 and some odd words. Yeah, that was and that was like before the revisions. And because of some comments Lyndall had or like thoughts, like I think it actually expanded a little bit. So it's probably close to 100,000 words or maybe even a little over. But that was the initial word count of my first draft. And and I'll say it's a really interesting experience to write for the Dummies series. And in some ways their structure made it easier because I had guardrails of what I could and couldn't do. And you have like very clear support and like, instructions and support. But at the same time, it was really overwhelming to start and I had to learn. And it took me a whole day just to even learn their word template that has macros in it. And so every single piece, like a headline is formatted differently than a bullet point, different than paragraph 1, than like a level 2 headline. And so I had to learn how to, like, as I'm writing it, I can see the book. I actually, in my Word document, it looks exactly like it's printed. But I have to format all of that as I go. And so that was another big piece that took me some time. In the vein of that, Lyndall, like, I'm curious for you, what was like one of the biggest surprises? Were there any big surprises for you in this experience, or things that sort of like, you're like, wow, okay.
Yeah, I think for me, the surprise was just how much or how aligned we were, and how similarly we approached things. And even down to, we were using some of the same tools, and we had some of the same concepts. Like, we both start with, sabbatical purpose and like, what are your themes or your pillars of your sabbatical, and really focusing on mindset and all this kind of stuff. And so I found myself like, there was so much like head nodding. Like, I'd be reading through a chapter going, yeah, what she said, yeah. And so I think the surprise for me was just because there's not a lot of people that do this, right? There's not a lot of people that work in the space that we work. And so to sort of almost like be looking under the hood of somebody else who's in this space, when actually I've basically created all of my, tools, methodology, ways, in a vacuum, because it's not like anybody else has done this before. And then to compare them and go, wow, cool. It was like almost validating, but I guess, really surprising at how aligned we were in the way that we thought about these things. I mean, there were some things we weren't aligned on.
Yeah, we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
No, and so I think it's interesting because you also got to see more of the alignment, right? So I'm seeing the feedback where we're different. And so it took me a while through the process, more so when I got to the author review and like really got to see it, more in detail, to know how aligned we were. But I think that was really interesting too, because you're right. All of the stuff I made up a mix of life coaching tools I've learned as a life coach mixed with my own sabbatical experience and then my actuarial planning brain kind of all come together. And so all the stuff I've just, made up and honed and worked on with my clients. And so to see it's kind of like these universal truths, right? And I think that's
Yeah,
what it showed
that's
me.
what, yeah, it was what was kind of shining through. I like that phrasing, the universal truth of what we were saying. And that was what was really shining through. We would often approach things differently, and
Yeah.
we're going to talk about that. But like at the essence, underneath it was like, yeah, we're sort of singing from the same hymn book.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I really appreciated that. That was good to know. It's like, especially as I'm writing this book. I think for me, the biggest surprise was how much I knew. And you guys, I'm going to be real. Like, I know a lot of stuff, but when you have to outline it into a book and then create a book that has like headings and then subheadings and then subheadings and really break stuff down to a super granular level, you really see what you know. And there are times where I was writing a section of a chapter and I would start writing stuff that I didn't even know that I knew. So I remember in this one moment, it was like, what are the pillars of mindset for a career break? It's like, I think in the book, it's called like the 6 golden rules of a, career break mindset. I've never spoken that out loud before, but as I was writing it down, yeah, never, no. As I was writing it down, I was just like, there were times where I genuinely felt like things were kind of channeling through me, and not that it was easy to get it out in the exact content, but like the actual things that I needed to say, I had no idea there was this much stuff in my brain. And like those 6 things just came out, and I was like, wow. And then I went back and I was like, are these all true? And I was like, that's true. That's true. That's true. I was like, is there anything missing? And I sat and I thought, and I was like, no. And I was like, okay, well, that's new. I've never shared that with a client before. And so, especially in that way. And so there were several moments like that. And I think what was really beautiful for me about this book is that it kind of summed up everything I've ever learned or experienced through my clients, over the last 6 years, because I've said things in that book that I've never said out loud. And I honestly feel like if anybody ever wants to work with me after this, I want them to read the book first, because I'm like, the book probably knows more than I do at this point. But it was just really, it was kind of magical in that way. And so looking back at it, I was like, wow, I know way more stuff than I even knew that I knew. Like I knew a lot of stuff about this, but I knew even more, than I even realized. And I think that's one of the cool parts about being an author is when you're tackling material, whether it's the story of your life and you're just processing that, or you're writing, like a reference book about how to do something, when you have to really connect all the dots. And for me, I'm great at speaking and I can't connect the dots with my words. I have to do it writing it out. You just really are forced to examine how much you do know, and also the things that you kind of know that you shine a light on, and then you crystallize those thoughts and hone those thoughts, and then you really know. And that was just like the neatest thing. And it was really cool when stuff was coming out of me that I had never said before. I really thought that was fun. I just want to have some fun with this one, Lyndall. Can we skip to I want to talk about this one thing that we realized we strongly disagree on. There were things that we do differently, for sure. Yeah. But there was this one thing that and it's so basic, like it's so basic, but I think
right in the very beginning.
Yeah, but it's deeper than that. And so you had a strong reaction, and then I had a strong reaction to your strong reaction. And so I thought we could follow the chain of events. So we talked about this before, but share, what was your sort of like one moment?
So the thing that we really, really kind of had different views on was the definitions of what is a career break and what is a sabbatical. Because Katrina really kind of talks much more about career breaks, and I talk much more about sabbaticals. And I read her a definition of a sabbatical being the person who's, always defining the sabbatical. And like I read it and I had to like step away to just calm myself down. I'm like, no, it's oh my gosh, oh, I can't do this. But because I had received the chapters out of order, this was like halfway through my journey, right? And so I'd already done all of this editing. And so I knew the book was, on the right track. And I agreed with, most of it. And then I read this and I was just like, you're what? You're defining it like that? And then I had to step away. And then I think I actually said in the feedback, I actually went back and looked. I had to, after our call the other day, I went back and looked at what I said, because I was like, I mean, how aggressive was I? I'm not sure. And so I actually read my feedback, and it was basically, that's not the way I define it. But in the context of your book, I understand why you have defined it that way. And at the end of the day, I don't care as long as somebody takes a break. It doesn't matter what they call it. Whatever they feel comfortable with calling it is, what they should call it. If they feel more comfortable with sabbatical. So the real difference in our definition is really, you were saying that sabbaticals are sort of employer sort of sponsored or led, and you return to the same job, whereas I definitely don't take that definition. And I talk about sabbaticals being more of a shorter time period, and career breaks being like longer time periods. I sort of define it more in the time period. But whether or not you return to the same job isn't sort of, in my world, the definition of sabbatical. But then I was like, you know what? I don't care. I cooled down, and I'm like, I don't care what they call it. It doesn't matter what they call it. Just take one.
Yeah, just take one. Yeah. So it's just so interesting, right? So I got your feedback on it, and I felt triggered, not like, like I didn't have like a rage fest or anything, but I felt triggered by your feedback because I feel really strongly about this for my own reasons, right? Which I'll share in a second. But I read that and I was like, and I forget exactly how, like how I read it, like what tone, and it wasn't like in a malicious way, but I remember reading it and being like, well, how could you, what? Why would you not agree with me on this? Like, what? Because it feels so strongly about it. Yeah. Like, what? And so what it boiled down to for me is, a big part of me writing this book was really about empowering people to think that breaks are just a part of life, that they aren't these highly privileged things that only really rich people can do, or that, only young kids in their, like early 20s should do. Like, I want the word break to not have a stigma. And I think for me, that's like a really deep underlying message that I don't really talk about. And like even wanting to write this book is like, stop stigmatizing breaks. And I feel like a lot of times, especially when people are returning from breaks, or they're worried about how their break is going to look on a resume or on LinkedIn, they're trying to come up with really cute catchphrases, like, especially if they're in the corporate world, right? Like corporate speak, of making sure that they're justifying this time with how they're labeling it, like this, like personal wellness revolution, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, not that they really say that, but it's just this idea that you have to put sexy words in it. And I'm like, why can't we just call it a break? Why isn't that good enough? Right? Why isn't that like acceptable and awesome and just part of life? And so it's kind of like, for me, the book is a revolution in the fact that like, it's just telling people to take a break, but understanding, right, that you have a different definition, and that's not wrong. But I think I didn't even know that I felt that way. And so after I read your feedback, I was like, Lyndall's right. Somebody could read this book and they could think like, I still want to call it a sabbatical, and now I have to call it a break because Katrina told me to call it a break. Like, that feels really bad. And the most important thing is that you take one. And then if more people take one, then the stigma decreases, and then we can call it whatever the hell we want to call it. But I actually wrote a sidebar. So in Dummies speak, the sidebars are the grayed out boxes, and they're meant to be things you want to include, but they're not like critical to the flow of the chapter. And so you could take them out and the book wouldn't lose any quality, but they're things that you would like to leave in. So sometimes I do analogies or stories in the sidebar, but I actually added a whole sidebar and I went on a rant. And as I was like revising your thing, and I was like, this is why you're going to call it a break. And then I was like, at the end, I was like, but ultimately what matters most is that you call it whatever it is that feels good to you, because you need to speak it to other people. And I really appreciated that, because I had never explicitly said that. Right. And like, I could see your point when I was like, I had to walk away from the feedback as well. I was like, cause every time like I had to open a new chapter and read more feedback, I would have to read it first, and then I would have to walk away, and then I would have to come back. So like, it's not personal. This is making the book better. But yeah, I like created this whole sidebar where I was like, I want to explain why I call it that and why I think of it that way. But ultimately, I think it was really important for me to call out, you can call it whatever you want. I think for both of us, that's at the end of the day, the most important thing is that people take breaks. So call it whatever you need to call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I read like how that ended up in the book, and I was like, solid. Yeah.
Lisa said that she had to be with me over the definitions too. I guess you guys are on the same page. That's so funny. So Lisa has coached career breaks as well. Hi
Yeah.
Lisa. Yeah. Hi Lisa. How's
Hey
it
there.
going? Yeah. Well,
Good.
I'm just curious, like, what was your beef? Like, was it the same as Lyndall's or was it something different? Did we have like tri beef or was it the same beef?
Well, so yes, I always called my own break a sabbatical. But I really like, and the reason why I chose the word sabbatical is because the thing I don't like about career break is it puts career as like the central part, which for
Yeah.
me, it was about my life. It was
Yeah.
about like career was a very important part of my life, but it was about a break from my whole everything, you know?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really want to focus on the career part. Like everything is about how we show how our careers, like making it so central. But Katrina, I really like your explanation of just saying like, let's normalize breaks, which I think is, I would definitely, I am definitely supportive of that idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I did just mention in the chat that yes, what I really liked is all the definitions you kind of put out there and all the names, because then when people are reading this, they can choose, like you said, the words that seem to fit them the best. Yeah.
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 And
Yeah.
I would totally get on board of just like, let's normalize breaks for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think we all agree on the key theme, right? Which is like normalize breaks and just get people to take one, create the comfort so they can take one. And I can see both of Lyndall and Lisa, I can see that point too. As far as like, not wanting people to put that strong emphasis on career like that. I didn't even think of it in that way. And that makes a lot of sense. I think for me, I also, because I was writing the book, some people will be taking a work sabbatical and some people would be taking like a non-work granted sabbatical, right? If you think of sabbatical just as breaks, shorter breaks. And I didn't want like some of the technical stuff in the chapters about like, how do you come back or how do you plan for one? Like if it sort of meant both, I felt like it also made it clear when I was talking about like certain tactical things, like what, like if you have an employer provide a benefit.
Yeah. And it was clear from the context of the book that the person has left and then they're finding another job, because that's part of that career break process. So having a sabbatical where you were returning to the same job, like the book is still really helpful, obviously in the beginning, but those last bits are not as applicable. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is like a great segue into, what did we learn from this experience, especially you and I, Lyndall, and like, how did it change or evolve our thinking about breaks to have sort of like two people? I mean, like I've never been this close to someone else's thoughts, right? On how to coach breaks. I've never really even known your process. I just know you do it. So I'm just curious, like, what did you learn or did in some way, how did this inform and hone your thinking about breaks or what you do?
Yeah, I think for me, it was like a little bit like you were saying, you sort of almost channeling, stuff. I'd never seen everything that is the way that I work sort of laid out, so it was really good to sort of see that. But having said that, it made me realize or maybe understand where our different focuses are, because your focus is a lot more on setting people up for success and helping them get onto the break and planning the break and making sure that like almost that the before the break begins all the way up to sort of day one, and then definitely in the break and post break, but less of a focus on that sort of psychological kind of journey. And then it kind of made me realize, oh, I really focus much more on that kind of psychological kind of change and transformation that somebody goes through. And I pepper in the planning stuff. But then when I was reading your chapters on like, how do you financially plan for the break? And I was just like, oh my God, this is so like, wow. Like I've never gone into this much detail before, So that was the kind of stuff that I really I guess, learned was, different about what we do. So do you want me to like share the kind of the model that I go through, or?
Yeah. And I'll just want to add before, as we're getting ready for that, I'll say, I think it was the same for me. So learning your process and learning how we're different. So, I think of myself secretly as a life coach first.
Yeah.
And then a career break coach. And the reason being that at the end of the day, this is just like one example of how I want people to live their lives, right? I want people to take breaks because I want people to feel empowered to give themselves the things that they need and to enjoy the life that they have and not think that they have to achieve a whole bunch more shit before they can enjoy it, right? And so because of my training as a life coach, my experience having a life coach before I ever became a life coach, and then being a life coach and having coached people on lots of things, right? I felt like where my life coachiness shines is in the planning piece, and the mindset stuff kind of like weaves in together with that, right? So it's like, I want you to have the right mindset and the right plan, because that's my actuarial side coming out. But I don't focus as much on the life coachy stuff when they're in the break, navigating, especially the career exploration stuff, right? Like the things that go beyond just like, I'm on this break and how do I use this time wisely? And how do I feel empowered to rest? Like those are the things that really light me up. And some of the feedback you were giving me, I was just like, wow, Lyndall goes really deep on some of this stuff in a way that I just don't. And like I can help someone in the moment if they're my one-on-one client and they have a stuck point. I will always show up for that. And I can work through any single stuck point, but to have a framework that I can zoom out and apply for almost everyone and that people can follow and that there's a general process or system, like I've never really done that to the extent that you have with some of that exploration piece, especially I think like what's coming next and just sort of like processing who am I in this, and what do I want? I do that individually ad hoc as someone needs it, but I really love the beginning piece, which is get really proud you're about to take this break, be really excited, learn how to navigate the fear part and live with that, and know that giving yourself what you need is always going to yield an amazing result. Feel empowered to rest, right? So those were my things. And I think you had some different things. And so, I feel like my life coachiness really shined in some aspects, but then, you really take that life coaching exploration. I mean, that coaching exploration stuff, like once they're into the break, I think in a different way. So yeah, go ahead and tell us about that.
So I can't share my screen because it's disabled for me, but I'm
just sorry. Yep.
I'll put the link in the chat, and then maybe you can you share the screen using that link.
Yes.
That just scroll down and you'll see the diagram. So as Katrina's getting that up. So basically, I sort of think of a sabbatical in kind of 5 psychological sort of phases, and I really take people through that. And the planning or the getting somebody onto the sabbatical is really just like that first step. And then what I do is, so if you scroll down on that. There we go. Yeah, so I really focus on the middle bit in the square, and that sort of step 5. And Katrina, I think, really focuses on the plan, so that phase 1, but sort of definitely, peppering through the middle bit. But the way I think of it is like, okay, the first phase of getting yourself onto the sabbatical is about giving yourself permission and committing to that plan. And actually intentionally designing that time in order to achieve your, sabbatical purpose. So we're really aligned on the way that we sort of do that planning piece. But then the support that I provide to people is really broken up into like when they're on sabbatical. That's really when I focus, because I really believe that the sabbatical is really like a catalyst for change in someone's life. And it's this incredibly rich moment where somebody can do some really deep work. And the sabbatical your life won't actually change in the sabbatical. You'll have to make the change after you return from sabbatical. But it's incredibly important to get that energy and that motion around and that clarity around what you want when you're coming from things from a recharged and really kind of relaxed state. So when you're on sabbatical, the first job to do is decompress. And that obviously takes a lot of time for some people. It depends on how burnt out you are. But basically, you know that you've fully decompressed when you really feel like you've kind of returned to yourself and you feel like you've got your mojo back, right? And then the middle of the sabbatical, I call collecting epiphanies, because it's like the most beautiful, magical kind of time on a sabbatical or a career break, because you've let go of all the work stress. You feel centered and grounded in who you are. But then you're out in the world doing things. You're hopefully being surrounded by amazing people and ideas and stimulation. And that's when your brain just starts getting on fire and things really start falling into place. And that's when you can really start to answer the big questions, like, what do I want next? And what do I want in my career? And how do I want to live my life, right? And so that's where I think a lot of sort of whirling can really start to sort of calmly cement into the phase 4, which is where you really start to create a plan for what's next. And Katrina had a lot of this stuff in the book too. It's like, I think you call it like the runway, right? So how are you going to not just get back into a job, but how are you going to kind of change your life and redesign your life to make sure that you don't burn out, or to, solve the relationship issues, or to get better work-life balance, or design a new relationship with work, right? And so that's where you really start to come into action at the end of your sabbatical. And then I think the unsung hero of a sabbatical is the last phase, which is really the work starts when you actually return, right? Because you've come up with all these great ideas and this plan of what you want to do on your when you get back. But then you get back to real life and you have to make it happen, right? And so that transition can be quite jerky for people as well. And I loved the advice in the book around, how to make that a bit smoother and how to sort of calm the kind of calm the nerves on that. But it's like really about making sure that people have the support to continue on that path and basically continue with the promises they've made to themselves while they're on their break. So but I really focus on that middle bit, whereas there wasn't as much of that kind of middle bit in Katrina's book. So it was just really interesting to reflect on the differences there.
Yeah, it was. And, I think my book is much better for having had your different perspective, because there were places where you kind of forced me to decide, like, what, if I had a framework, what is my framework? Right. And so, cause I always wanted it to come from me. I'm not like trying to rip off Lyndall's stuff. Right. But it's like, well, what, if that's Lyndall's process, like, how is my process different and what is my process? But I definitely feel like you shine on that in the break phase, especially I would say that maybe second half, and I'm really passionate about helping people change before the break even starts and giving them ramp and runway into this life-changing experience and having tools to navigate any kind of challenge. But you had some really great structure, I think, that is applicable for multiple people, especially for my clients, or the people out there that are just like, but what does that look like, Katrina? Because I can tell you in the moment when you're stuck, like, I'll tell you exactly what it looks like, but I don't have a structure or framework to help you sort of apply it or know exactly what that looks like before you've arrived at that moment. So I really appreciated that, from your perspective. So just curious, Lyndall, what were your thoughts on the end result? Like we did a book. So, once it was done, like, and it all kind of was finished, like, what were just your thoughts on like the book, the process, just in general?
I mean, I literally was just like, my hat goes off to you. Like, I absolutely couldn't believe the mountain that you had climbed and that you had brought this thing into the world. And I was just so glad that somebody had put this to paper, and that we have this kind of definitive guidebook on how to do this now, you know. So it was it was awe, and it's weird, but like relief that somebody has written it down, and they've written it down so well, and that person didn't have to be me.
I respect that, Lyndall. I respect that. I just saw Roger's question. Was our other editor a referee? So that's a funny question, Roger. So the way that it worked, Lyndall and I never went back and forth. So I would write it, and then Lyndall got one chance to review it. She never saw the changes.
It's like my changes just went into a void, and I'm like,
a void. Yeah.
I think they were helpful.
So she wouldn't do it. So what would happen is when I would see a place where Lyndall and I either disagreed, or where I could see her point, but I still felt very strongly about what I already had, I would write a note to my editor, to the developmental editor, the project manager, and I would say, Lyndall has a great point, but this is why, blah, blah, blah. And then I would be like, let me know if you disagree. So I counted on them as like the third party to be like, if you're really removed from this altogether and you don't know anything about breaks, does my point of view make sense? Does it feel like there's a loophole, or does it feel like, you know, like I need to reconsider Lyndall's feedback? And so I would say I took probably 75% of what Lyndall put in there and made changes based on that, to varying different degrees. And like, if I didn't, it really solidified for me why I felt that way. And I would put that in the comment for the editor to read, so that she knew I wasn't ignoring it. Like, you have to address every single thing. Even if you don't agree with it, you have to put like why or done if you did it, so that they know that you didn't miss anything. And so I would just explain it. And I think there was actually maybe a time or two that my development editor had a question, you know, and she was just like, could you make that more clear? But it was never, because we didn't go back and forth. We didn't get to like duke it out. Although I'm sure if we could have, Linda would have been like, girl, what are you talking about? This is not a sabbatical stuff. You need to change that.
I think like, to the point though, there was never like right or wrong, you know. There's just kind of, this is the way I think of it, you know. So it's kind of like, you can't, it's like, how could you ever make something so gray, black and white? I mean, you just couldn't, right? So
yeah,
I think there wasn't ever a point where I was like, no, you're wrong.
Yeah. You're like, you failed. This is not right. And I like what Lisa said about like the hero's journey and just those phases that, you know, people go through. And I do think like everybody's break is different, but there are definitely some common threads, and that sort of upfront permission to rest and decompress is a big one. And so many people think they're supposed to jump on a plane right away and, you know, do the most exciting thing and just go like YOLO their way through, you know, the globe or whatever. And really it's like, hey, well, what if you just rested a little, like eased into it a little bit. So I definitely like that. I have a book on the hero's journey that I want to read, just actually because of my curiosity and like how the sabbatical and career break journey like maps out to that. But I do agree with that. I think
but I have a question for you.
Oh, for me. Okay.
So you asked me, okay, so what, like, how's your thing different? And like, how would I sort of, you know, what would it have looked like if it was me writing the book? But I think that it would be really interesting to know, like, well, now that you've written it, is there anything that you would do differently, or is there anything missing? Or like, what would you, now that it's out there, is there anything you would change? I don't know. Is that a naughty question?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, Lyndall. I would say, so I have two parts to that. The first part is, you know, I feel really good about where the book is. So I think there are things the book can't do, and that's maybe it versus like different what I would do next. But first I would say, you know, the one thing that kept me going, especially through the author review, which was really, oh, Lisa, it was so great to have you stop by. Sorry you have to run, but thank you so much for coming. The one thing I will say is that I felt so dedicated to the reader. Like there were times where the feedback was really hard and the revisions were even harder. And I just wanted to be done with the book. I mean, after writing it for 9 months, and then you have to like figure out how to rewrite it and make it make sense and incorporate like all this feedback, it just felt really overwhelming sometimes. And I wanted to just be like, delete all comments, all suggestions, and I'm just leaving it, right? Because it's like, I already wrote it once, I can't rewrite it again. And I just wanted to be like, disagree, and just not even because I disagree, just because I didn't want to rewrite it. And the one thing I always came back to is, if the reader is reading this part, are they going to get stuck here? And I never wanted to have a place where this amazing book didn't get finished and somebody didn't get the break that they needed because I let them get stuck because I was being lazy. And so I dug really deep many times, especially in that author review period, to just say, like, does the reader need this? And if the reader needed it, then I was going to like show up and figure out how to make it work or how to rework it. And so I feel really great about that. And I think what the book did well is take them on the journey. But to your point, right, what the book can't do, and I think at the end of it, when I reflected on where does this book leave people, the answer is it leaves them with having to apply, right, all this stuff by themselves. And so I think there are certain types of people that love DIY. They have the motivation and the self-accountability and maybe the situation and the mindset to go through it, apply what they need, and make it happen. But I think for a lot of people, they'll get halfway through it or a third of the way through it, and it will make so much sense. But you can't see your own blind spots. And I know that, you know, being able to have that perspective of someone outside of you is really important. And so I think the place that it stops is having an expert opinion or point of view, or just even an objective perspective to help people apply the things, especially the hard things, right? You can read my book and be like, yeah, I should totally rest. And then get into your break and freak out about resting and be like, well, no, this is different because now I'm being lazy and I'm really productive. And I love that part about me. And that's my personality. And so, you know, it's hard to see yourself. And so actually, in that process, I realized sort of the missing piece is having a space where people can apply the stuff that they're learning in the book and apply the things that I've shared. So that's actually why I'm launching a membership, and I'm really freaking excited about it. It's called the Break Room, and it's going to be launching officially in January, but stay tuned, you guys, in your emails, because pretty soon I'm going to be sending out an email having you join a wait list, and there's a special price. It's founding member price. It's going to be very low, but it's basically a space. I really wanted to create a space where people could come, ask questions, get coached, and apply like all of this stuff, right? Because it's really good stuff, but it doesn't matter if you get stuck somewhere. It doesn't matter how great the next chapters are, you won't make it there. And so I really want to hold people's hands through whatever part they're struggling with and really create a space where they see other people just like them shooting for the same goal and trying to make the same thing happen, whether they're planning for a break or they're actually on a break. So I'm very excited about this. And, you know, I really love that the book gave me a chance to do all of this and to give people that roadmap so that I could create a space and just really focus on like, how can I help them apply it? Because for me, that's the fun part. So I love that you asked me that, Lyndall.
Yeah. And that's so important. Like there's only so much that you can put in a book. And then sometimes it's just hard to make it real in your own life. And having people that are on the same kind of crazy journey with you, and having access to an expert like yourself, I mean, that makes all the difference in somebody basically not taking a break or taking a break. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to hear that you've got a membership going. That's great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was the same thing, right? Like that's our goal, is to get more people to take breaks. And so it's like, you know, on this journey of all the things we're doing, where could somebody get stuck? Because we want them to take breaks. So I feel really excited about it. And I feel excited for what you're doing. So Lyndall, you know, oh wait, when am I getting to talk? You guys, please let me just have my moment and enjoy this.
Yeah.
Being an author.
She's like, one thing at a time, guys. Gosh.
Oh my God. I have to tell you, I have a massive fear of public speaking. I do it, but when I get on a stage, oh my gosh, I get like TMJ and like my pits start sweating and like I just feel like the world is going to implode. And I'm like, don't show your fear. I'll do it. But like I have like I have since I was a child, like an incredible sense of stage fright. And so the TED Talk feels overwhelming just for that. But then also I have a friend that is a TED Talk coach, and I know a lot goes into, right, finding that formula. And Lyndall, actually, you did like a pitch for a TED Talk. Yeah. So you've done.
I did a little mini TED Talk. And so it was just like 5 minutes. And I was like, oh yeah, this will be fine. I'll just do it on the side. It took over my life for like 2 weeks. I was like, I had no idea this was going to be so hard. But yeah.
Yeah, it's intense. So I won't say never. Yeah. Yeah, I won't say never, but I will say, I'm really hoping that I get to talk about the book for a while because I wrote it and I feel great about it. And that TED Talk, man, like it's not just the talking, it's coming up with that 15-minute thing that's just poised in such a way that you're intriguing people and you're entertaining them and you're pulling them along, and then you slap them with some teaching and they're like, what? My brain has just exploded. And that just feels like a lot. So I'll let you guys know, but that's not a 2024 plan, maybe 2025. And if I do, you guys will have to come see me do my TED Talk so I can see some friendly faces in the audience. I love it. You guys are so amazing. So, Lyndall, what are you doing these days? Are you still coaching? Like what? I mean, I assume that, yeah. So what's your deal?
Yeah, so I focus on coaching individuals, and I really focus on I help people get onto their sabbatical, but really focus on helping them through that sabbatical journey, and really using the sabbatical as a catalyst for change, so that they can return to a better life, better work, all of that kind of stuff when they get back.
Do you do one-on-one, or do you do groups, or do you both, or?
One-on-one, I definitely focus on one-on-one, but I also work with corporates too. So I actually help corporates set up sabbatical programs for their employees, and then coach those employees like through the corporate as well. So those are the two elements.
I love that. Okay, that's awesome. I admire that, and that's work that's needed as well. So I'm glad that you're doing that work in the world.
And actually, I mean, now that I think that that's also the reason that I focus on the word sabbatical, because I work with the corporates. That's a much more palatable word for the
right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And I'm sort of trying to rebel against corporate. And so I think that's part of my rebellious spirit, as part of like, I'm taking a break. So this is just funny how the context informs that. This was so much fun, Lyndall. Thank you for coming. And you guys are awesome. Thank you all for joining us and being here. Do you guys have any last minute questions before we go? Anything you want to know about the book or sabbaticals in general? We're happy to answer them, or the dummies thing. We can talk about that too. But yeah, it was so nice to like have you all here asking such great questions.
Through the questions, no, I think we've answered everything. Yeah.
Okay. Look at us. Look at us. This was so great. I'm so happy that you guys took time to come hang with us and celebrate. Like I said, this was really fun for me, and it's so cool to reflect on the process now that it's over. And Lyndall, I really appreciate you being here, just because you were such a big part of this book. So thank you for all of your help.
And I keep on having to tell Katrina, like, I was a tiny, tiny part compared to how much you did. So I mean, the biggest applause goes to you.
Thank you so much. Well, I love you guys all. Thank you so much for buying the book, and I hope you love it. If you have questions about it or anything, just shoot me a note. If you're like, this didn't make sense, or why this, or oh my gosh, this was great, like just let me know. But in the meantime, I'll send you off to enjoy the rest of your upcoming weekends. And you guys are just so amazing. Thank you all for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.